New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Why, hello. It's me, yes, me, Bonnie Gonzalez, your doula for grief. And just a little bit about me before we just launch into our great show today is that I am a grief coach. I'm also a registered nurse, a religious science practitioner, and a soul collage facilitator. And most importantly, I'm a human being on the planet right here with you during these truly auspicious times. So thank you for joining me today. And I just want to say, if this is your first time joining me for Your Doula for Grief, I want you to know that you have come to the right place to start your journey on healing with grief or healing from grief. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. I'm honored. And what I'd like to say to both new or returning is make this hour about you and for you. Make these next 60 minutes a part of your day and drop us a comment. Let us know you're out there listening. If you have a question, drop a question, comment, anything that you would like to share with us is welcome. So my job here today is what I always say, that I am here to continue to move the needle on bringing grief out of the shadows of our lives and right smack into our daily conversations and daily lives. Because grief is a tremendous teacher, a tremendous healer. Grief is the biggest, emotional experience, human emotional experience you will ever have. Grief has so many gifts. You know, grief's superpower is healing. And to say this about grief is that loss is what then puts us into grief. And loss is defined by anything expected or even unexpected that changes our lives in a way that we can't go back to the way it was before. And those things include, yes, death. Death is the most painful human emotion and experience we will have. So yes, death is number one as far as losses. But how about a job, a loss of a relationship, geographical move, surgeries, a divorce, divorce, that's another big one. So yes, those are the losses that we experience. And those things then in turn put us into grief. And grief is all of those emotions that we will experience: anger, sadness, confusion, numbness, and sometimes even joy. So it's loss is what we experience, and grief is what we feel. And there's 3 pillars of grief that I always like to say that are needed to start that healing process. And that grief needs to be heard. Grief needs to be shared. And grief needs to be validated. And in that validation is, the quote by Bell Hooks, that she says we can't grieve in isolation, which is so true. We really do need to grieve. And knowing that grief has this magical superpower to heal us, change us, transform us in a positive and life affirming way. If we can allow ourselves to just lean into grief. And that is the difficult part of it. We want to shy away from grief. We want to not really feel it, but that is exactly what we need to do. We need to just lean into that grief. Let it feel it. We need to allow ourselves to feel it. To heal it, you have to feel it to heal it. And there is Sabon Somé, who is a West African folklorical writer who has now made her transition. But I love what she has to say about grief. She says, we experience joy and sadness, and many times we have grief that we don't have words for. We have many losses. And it's important for us to grieve, to recover from what we've lost. Grieving is a soul cleansing way to reclaim and recover our spirit. When we don't grieve, we stay in an unhealthy place and lose who we are. So it is very important to cry, to walk in nature, to express our grief so that we can feel safe and sane once again. And also so our bodies can recover from the loss. So I thank her for saying that. She says that just so beautifully. And I have a guest that's coming on. Well, first, our theme for today is unraveling, grief unraveled, grief unraveled. And I have a beautiful guest that is going to come on and share this unraveling and lead us into unraveling grief and understanding its many layers and complexities. I just have the most fantastic guest today, and I'm just so honored to have her here with us today. We're in for a special treat. My guest today is Shari Thomas, and Shari Thomas is a grief educator and has coaching services that includes EFT, which is emotional freedom technique therapy, hypnotherapy, spiritual response therapy, and energy work. I like to say Shari has all bases covered when it comes to modalities to work through grief. So please help me welcome my guest to the show today, Shari Thomas, and she's in the stars and the moon back. She has the stars and the moon supporting her today. She's got the cosmos. Shari, thank you and welcome and welcome. And again, I am so happy to have you, and I thank you for your yes. It's just, it's lighting me up, as I know it will lighten our guests up, or light our guests up with understanding. So how are you, first of all?
I'm doing well, Bonnie, and thank you for inviting me to come here to your show today. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, Shari, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and what led you to the path of becoming a grief educator?
Well, it wasn't really in the stars, and it wasn't until, many of us travel different paths to find our purpose. And so it took me a while in a few different modalities before I really understood what it was for me. My experience with death happened at a very young age. I was 10 years old when my father died suddenly, and I was daddy's girl, and he was also a perpetrator. What we call in grief is that became complicated grief. When you have this love and this hatred for people, which is really human also.
Yes,
And
yes.
so I just, it was interesting, just fast forward maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I ended up volunteering in Tacoma, Washington for it was called Bridges, and it was a center for grieving children.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
I was able to work. First, they put me with little ones, which is like 3 to 6,
Oh,
and they have a hard time comprehending where their mom or dad went when they died. And
mm,
so, like, they thought maybe they just went to the grocery store. But
uh,
then they put me with the tweens, so that would be, 13 to 15,
yeah.
and I just found my groove with them.
Oh, wow, Sherry.
And I need to
What?
tell you that one little gal in that class said to me, she goes, "Well, maybe your dad had to die so that you could be here with us."
Yeah.
And I just thought, out of the mouths of
Mm.
babes.
Yes, yes, yes. Sherry, just speak more to the tween, why you found your groove with tweens, because tweens can be either for you or not for you. A lot of people just can't understand that, those tween times, and I think tweens can't understand themselves at that time. But what was that about that experience? Could you speak more to that?
Yes, and I think that this Bridges Center for Grieving Children is a model program in the US, through Mary Bridge Children's Hospital, and it was just a wonderful experience, especially with the tweens, because and I remember this from going into 6th grade, was we don't want anybody to look at us differently. We don't want
Oh,
anybody to really know or talk about it. We
mm,
just put on this false self and
mhm.
go through life. And so they had some place where they could come in a group of other children who had experienced the same thing.
Yes, yes.
And so I think that was the little miracle that would continue to happen there, is that they could finally find a place where they could open up. And
Yes. Connect.
that is a tough time. You got
Mhm.
hormones, you got so
Oh,
much pressure, and yeah. So
yeah.
it was a wonderful experience for me.
Mm. And so from there, working with the children, that led you to what was the next step?
Well, I had already been, gone through the Grief Recovery Institute in Los
Oh,
Angeles
yeah. Uh-huh.
and became a grief recovery expert, I guess. Um, and so I took a 6-week course, and then I took it and condensed it to doing weekend workshops, around grief. And it was so interesting because the process is about unraveling grief. And as people would find out some of the techniques that I use, that I was taught, that what they came originally for, the grief they thought they were going to be working on in this weekend workshop, they totally shifted because there was other sorrow and grief that they had never dealt with. So that's one of the things that I do in my workshops, is to do a loss graph, basically. And I loved how you said Bonnie, in the beginning, about a lot of people just think I'm grieving when there was a death. But I have this cute little, I mean, it's 20 some years old, but it's a little cartoon that someone put up, and it says these are kinds of losses. Of course, physical abuse, but a new baby in the family. We don't realize, right? We're not number one anymore. Of course, divorcing, but breaking up with your boyfriend, even when your parents lose a job, or say you got put back in a reading class and all your friends went on. There's just, I mean, these are just some, small little things that we end up skimming right over because we're never taught how to grieve. And I think
Right.
that was the main thing that I got out of, 20 some years ago, is understanding how we're never taught how to grieve. We just watch the people in our lives. They might cry behind the door, They
Mm-hmm.
don't emote in front of people.
Right.
So, yeah.
And and you touched on something also that I didn't, one of the areas I didn't talk about with loss. And you touched on that with the birth of a baby, a promotion, a graduation, where we see the celebratory part of it, but your life has changed. And it is a loss from what you had to this
Mhm.
new space and place that you're moving into. So I thank you for bringing that part up. And also, yes, you're so correct. When I do my workshops, I ask, how did you learn to grieve? Who taught you how to grieve?
Yeah, I like too in your intro about the dualities of emotions. So we can have both this grief and loss and then have joy. And one of my favorite quotes that I use is by Khalil Gibran.
Oh my
And
God.
I'm just going to paraphrase the very last line in one of his works is that no matter how deep sorrow has carved into your soul, the more joy you can contain. So I love that visual that, it carves this deep hole and then we can still contain the joy. And
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize that we can really hold both. We can
Mhm.
have deep, I mean, deep, painful sadness, but we can also hold joy in our
Mhm.
hearts. We are really built that way to be able to hold both. And in my personal experience, Shari, and you can let me know if this is yours, that so many of my clients don't really want to go to that area of grief and really feeling that deep sadness because they're feeling that they won't be able to recover from it. That it's like a riptide or something that takes you under and you'll never come back up again. What's your experience with people's hesitancy, would you say, to lean into grief or be with grief?
Well, one is just what those little kids, that I used to work with, well, young humans, um,
Yeah.
is
Young.
that we don't want to be pitied.
Oh,
Sometimes
yes.
we don't want to talk about it.
Mhm.
And what have found a lot in my work is that it's stuck. So that's one of the things that I do in my workshop is to talk about how grief and sorrow. Well, first of all, let me just say that in some cultures, especially indigenous cultures, they do keening, which is that outward expression of screaming and getting
Yes.
out. 'Cause
Wailing.
yes, because it's energy. It's energy.
Mm. Oh, I love
So
that.
all these little losses that we're not dealing with, this energy goes in here
Mm.
into our bodies and it's
Mhm.
suppressed. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh,
But
yes.
what we do is all of a sudden there's just all this energy. And if we don't deal with it, there might be the slightest little loss. And pretty soon we're yelling at other people and we want to kick the dog. And, it's coming out of us. So the
Mm.
more we can, what you called, and I love that, lean into our grief, the
Mhm.
less it's going to be contained and held inside of us.
Mhm. Oh, very.
And yeah, I just find that it's so important. So, teaching our children how to have all of their emotions, not just mad, sad, glad, the few 4 or 5 that kids that we learn.
That's
Um,
that's
there's
socially
also
acceptable.
right. So I love a feelings wheel. I give that out so that people can, well, what is this feeling? What is this really that I'm having? And then I love too about well, let me just say that when I went through the Grief Recovery Institute and started working on that, I was already a body worker and
Oh,
I had started picking up out of people's bodies things that I would question and I would ask them, and they go, "Oh yeah, I got in an accident, and that's what that scar is, or that's what that ache is, or
Mhm.
whatnot." And I said, "Well, gosh, did you have a hard time dealing with that?" And no, well, it's still in there. And so
Ah,
that's kind of how I progressed. And then I just was fascinated with the subconscious mind and
okay.
how there is a record. That's a record keeper.
Okay.
And so that's when I went to the Northern California Institute for hypnotherapy.
Okay. Yes, yes.
And I
And hip
find that, so much is buried in our subconscious mind. And that what exactly what you said, Bonnie, was about not wanting to go into the darkness, into
mm,
the abyss of grief, is because they feel like they'll never come out.
yes.
And I love what you said about it actually just brings you into sprouting more openness.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
whenever the time is right, and there is no time on grief,
Oh, yes.
you can contain more joy. And you
Yeah.
never give up the love of whatever was lost. I don't even like to
Mhm.
use the word lost because
Yeah.
I don't believe anything's ever lost in God's world, but um,
Okay. Well, we have to
yeah,
have a frame of reference, right, or something.
yeah.
Oh, wow, that's just, oh, you're just bringing up so many questions for me, and I'm going to try to be logical in some logical format here. Um, when you said there's nothing lost, and you were talking about things getting buried that maybe we have not expressed or haven't had time to really come full circle with it or have it align in our lives in some way. Do you feel that things will eventually come up, or do you need therapy to help bring them up, or what is your feeling around that, those things that we don't grieve and they get suppressed?
Well, when I was going through a very difficult time, I've been divorced and I've lost parents, and I eventually lost my mother and my stepfather, and then my special dog that I had for 12 years. They're
That's,
like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, sometimes
very
it's harder for
close.
people to grieve their animals than it is, a spouse. But so I think that the subconscious mind is things are buried. And I
Hmm.
always use this analogy. Those divers that go down with the big things on their head, the deep sea
Yeah.
divers, they
Yes.
go down and they come up slowly. All right. The
Oh,
reason they have to come up slowly is because if they pop up, they'll get the bends and they could die.
yes,
So I
yes.
like that analogy when people are
Hmm.
trying to force their way into, healing from grief, is that you're just going to come up slowly. Those memories are going to come up
Right.
because I also work with a lot of people who have had trauma in their childhood.
Hmm.
And so oftentimes a lot of those memories are buried. And it's important to um, know that the answers are inside of each of us. And
Hmm.
I feel as a coach and doing the different therapies that I do with people is that I help you uncover the answers within you.
Oh,
I'm just a teacher. I'm just like you. I think you said a conduit. It's how we can assist others to move through, possibly to have some of those memories come up, and then give them techniques and tools on how to deal with them.
hmm.
That's the EFT is called emotional freedom technique, and that many of you know is about tapping. So
Yes.
you're dealing with the vagus nerve, so you're not in the sympathetic nervous system. You're more in the rest and digest part, so that you can relax. I think one of the main things that I like to talk to people about is um, the myths of grief. So could I
Okay, let's go
just
there. Yes, let's go
this is
there. The
part of the
stories from you.
unraveling, because
Yes,
we're
that's
taught all
yes.
these other things. And I'm sure, Bonnie, you've had other people, and I know that you have shared with people about maybe what not to say to a grieving
Uh,
person. And
yes,
I find
yes.
this is so important
And
because we don't know what to say, right?
because we haven't been taught what to say. Our
Mhm.
whole reference with meeting with people is that we want to make them feel better. I mean, really, that's what we want, but we don't know what to say. So it's these things that we think would make them feel better, but unfortunately, it's not the truth. So yes,
Right.
please, I'd love to have you share again what
Oh,
not
thanks.
to say to agree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is we're always well intended.
Oh
I mean,
yes.
it's never this is nothing about being malicious or ignorant or anything. It's about what you just said, we weren't taught.
Mhm.
So to tell somebody, "Oh, don't feel bad."
Yeah.
They're in a better place.
Ugh, but I'm not. that's that's my comeback for that
And
one.
then
I'm
my question is, how do you know that?
mm,
I mean, that's your
mhm,
belief, but are you putting that belief on the widow or the child or, whatever it is? And then I got this from John Gray of the Recover Institute.
yeah.
He and his wife, they lost a baby. And when someone would say to them, well, you can still have another.
Yeah, exactly.
So oftentimes we're hearing these things and we're being taught to replace the loss. So I've worked with
Yeah.
people who somebody was dying of cancer. It was a long death. Um, and so the spouse or the caregiver was already grieving.
Oh
So
yeah.
by the time that person, their partner, passed, then, they maybe got married again in 6 months, and people are like, what? That's too fast. Well,
Mhm,
do you understand that they did a lot of grieving before? And maybe they're not just replacing the loss.
mhm.
Maybe they're opening up their heart for new love.
Yeah.
So we don't know. We don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I just want to interject there that what you just described is anticipatory grief,
Right.
that person has grieved that loss that's coming up. And so many times when you talk to people that have been through that anticipatory grief and then the person has transitioned, they will say it was harder. That grief process leading up to that was harder than the after. So I just
Mhm.
wanted to interject that there about anticipatory grief. So yes, please continue. I love that. Yes, yes, yes.
And I witnessed that a lot working for hospice also, you know.
Mhm.
Um, where another myth or what we're taught is to grieve alone. That's the
Oh
mother that's behind the closed door crying.
yeah.
Um, another one is to just give it time. So grief doesn't have a timeline. Grief
Mhm.
sometimes will just ebb and flow. Sometimes you'll
Yes.
feel an overwhelming emotions. Sometimes you get the brain fog and you go to what we call planet grief.
Oh,
There's
I
there's
love that.
just there's not a timeline. And if we think there is, then we'll maybe project that onto a grieving person. So
Mm.
these are just, things to kind of be aware of. And also working with the parents and the children is about, well, just be strong for others.
Oh, yes,
As a
yes,
child being told, you just have to be strong for your mother. Well, that was my father that died. Do you know
yes.
what I'm saying? So these are just all,
Mhm.
different things that we can look at in the way we speak to the grieving people. Or oftentimes a griever will just stay busy. And I think the one thing is when we ask people, maybe at a celebration of life or a funeral or a wake, or, well, what can I do for you? Please call me. What can I do for you? They're in their grief. they're off to Planet Grief. They're still mending that place in their heart where that person, physical person, was. And so they don't know what they need. And oftentimes people, and you probably shared this and other guests have shared, in regards to, initially there's a meal train or people are bringing something. I always say, I'm here for you. I don't know how you're feeling, but I am here for you. Yes, and I will walk beside you. Yes. And so after the meal train is done and after, all the business is taken care of, which I belong to an organization that actually did research, and they say it takes 2 years once someone's died to clear up all of their business. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
And so I always suggest contact them again, give them, whether it's next month or, maybe they need a meal in a month or they want to go to lunch in a month. And if they don't feel like talking, they don't feel like talking. But exactly what you said in regards to being heard and being witnessed, and the healing happens there.
And I'm just so glad you're bringing that up when you talk about what do you need. Call me if you need anything. Well, I'm here to tell you they're not going to call. They're not going to call. So what I've taken to doing, I say, I'll check in on you. And I've got a busy life like everybody else, and I'll make a note somewhere on a little sticky note, call Deborah on Tuesday, so that I'm reminded, because it's just human nature, because of what you're saying, that so many of us have been taught that we need to grieve in isolation. And as I said, Bell Hooks says we can't grieve in isolation. So even if you say, I love what you said, Shari, I'm here for you. That's an expression from Thich Nhat Hanh. I am here for you. That is the most beautiful. Those are beautiful words that you could say to someone. And also to know, don't say, call me. I know you mean it from the heart. I know when people say it, they mean it, but it's just the nature of that person. So thank you for confirming, for affirming that.
Well, also, and it does go back to that then, that we need to grieve in isolation. It was what we witnessed. We don't, no public display is acceptable. It just is part of our culture, I think, too, sometimes. And depends on where you are. Some different areas and tribes and whatnot, they have more of the sacredness that goes along with grief, not just death, but with the actual of grief and sorrow and time and that type of thing. So.
And the quote that I read from Sabong Sume, in there, it's a West African culture, and we're not there, and we can't. We can accept accept and maybe look at what other cultures do, and not by any stretch of the imagination am I saying put us down. This is just what we learned, and now we're just trying to unlearn what Maya Angelou says: when you know better, you do better. But in their culture, they wouldn't dare say to someone, oh, aren't you over that yet? Haven't you grieved long enough? It's been enough time. Enough time has passed. And she was saying what they would say in their culture is, have you grieved enough? Have you cried enough? Have you walked in nature enough? Giving that person permission to feel that it's okay to truly be in their grief. And they also feel that when someone goes through a loss and are in grief, it's not just Shari's in grief. They would say grief has found us, making it a communal type of a recovery in a place that everyone is in. So then therefore it does free up those emotions to just be on display, for lack of a better word. Yes. So any more on what not to say?
No, I think I just want to give an example. I was working at a gym many, many years ago, and I ran into an old friend, and this was when the we were in one of those wars in the Middle East, and she asked me, "Well, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a grief educator. I'm a grief therapist." And she just looked at me and like she didn't know what to say. And so she said, "Well, I bet you have a lot of work now that we're involved in that war." And I said, "That's interesting."
Yes.
And
Why would you say that?
I bet she turned around and went, "I don't know why I would say that, but people don't know what to say, you know?"
Yes. Exactly.
Um, I when I became a death midwife, I went back to the town where I was living, and I was so excited to educate people on home funerals and green burials, and this is a really ecologically minded community in California, and no one wanted to really talk about green burials.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's never going to happen to me, right?
Right, right. Is it green burial?
Green,
Green?
green burials.
Okay, great.
So
Yeah.
there are now places where there are ways to place the body of your loved one that is more ecological than in a cemetery, in a
Yes.
concrete box, in a metal
Yeah.
box with formaldehyde in the body. I mean, don't get me started on that now. But
We
I
don't want
think,
to put any
oh, go ahead.
companies out of business. No, I said we don't want to put any companies out of
No,
business, but
no.
yeah.
A lot of what we do is traditional. But many years ago, I was in association management, and the highest earning people were in the funeral industry.
Wow.
So, administrations. And so I just want to, I guess I'm a little passionate about, we need someone to guide us at the end of life with our loved ones,
Yes.
but also realize that we're at a very vulnerable time.
Mm-hmm. Grief, yes. Grief
Yeah.
is, yes. Um, and I too want to share that I was just last week telling someone what I do, that I'm a grief coach, and Your Doula for grief, and they said to me, like almost in a whisper, God, isn't that depressing? I just thought, no, I didn't think. I just said no. I said, when I'm talking about grief, I said, all burners are fully lit. I said, grief is a big life teacher. And so for me, it's like, no. And that person in that moment proceeded to cry and said that she had been holding some deep grief for the last 30 years. And I said, "Oh, honey, just go ahead and be with it and cry." And she goes, "No, no, somebody come and distract me. Somebody come. I need to talk to somebody. Have somebody come over and distract me from this." That's like, oh, really? My heart just went out to her. My heart went out to her in that moment. And if there's something that is mine to do, is to help prevent that kind of needing for a distraction, but providing a safe place that you feel safe and held and nurtured, that you can go to that place. That is mine to do. And also, you talked about, that thing about time, time, and you'll get over it, whatever. It's not just time, but it's time and attention. If you're doing, yes, time and attention, and grief still. I just say that grief is unpredictable and uncontrollable, and just accepting that as a part of its persona, the way it shows up.
Well, I think it's important to have some tools, and
Yes.
that's what you teach, and that's what I teach. Tools on how to navigate.
Yes. Um,
And oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I want to ask you a couple things all the way back, but maybe just give us maybe your top 5 tools. Maybe could we do that, and then I'll go back and ask a question, and I'll start
Okay.
my question. So,
One of
if
the,
you want to do
because
it that way.
I deal with trauma and people who in childhood suffered trauma. And where there's grief, there's not always trauma. But wherever there's trauma, there's always grief.
I love that, Shari. Yes.
So a lot of the people I work with as adults suffered trauma when in their childhood. And so what we do around that is, of course, address shame, abandonment, things that were basically put upon them. But they feel as though they need to put it under an umbrella, like loss of trust.
Okay. Yes.
So how do you grieve loss of trust? Well, loss of trust is pretty vague and it's out there. So usually you have to bring that down, and what memory or what person was that initiated that loss of trust? And then we give them tools to work through that. So loss of trust, loss of innocence, those that have been sexually abused, and basically a lot of people say loss of their childhood.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that is sad. It is hard to deal with, but we can break it down. Do you know what I mean? It's not so ambivalent. I don't know if that's the right word to use around that, but so yeah, breaking it down. And then also I find doing a loss graph. And then once I have people do a loss graph, then I have them do a relationship graph to that person. So if we're looking at any of these loss of innocence, then they're going to do a relationship graph, which has to do with the loss, as well as a happy thought of something that they had with that person. Because oftentimes, if we have had trauma or had, I don't know quite what to say, we don't want to vilify someone. They're not, none of us are totally bad. So if you had a relationship with someone who was not kind in a lot of different ways, then I'm sure there were times glimpses of goodness in them.
Yes, yes.
You know, there's goodness. It's the yin yang thing. So, so we do a relationship graph, and then we do in Hawaii, where I used to live, it's called Ho'oponopono.
Oh, yes, love that mantra.
So it's similar, but I have people do a letter, and that has to do with, I am sorry for, I apologize. I don't really like saying I'm sorry. So many people say they're sorry when maybe they're not, but I apologize for, I forgive you for, I want you to know. And then I give people an option whether they say I love you. But the most important thing is to say goodbye.
Okay, Shari, that's, yeah.
Just by saying goodbye, it takes a little bit of this is going to drag on forever. And usually I'm dealing with people who have lost, we're talking decade-old loss, and they've carried it, they've ruminated on it, it's deep inside of them. And so just by doing some of these writing exercises, you can bring a finality. And I learned that in the Grief Recovery Institute in regards to when you call somebody at the end of the conversation, you're going to say goodbye.
Exactly. You're going to end it.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that my grief educator certification came through David Kessler's training. I loved Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Death and Dying, and that's my jam. But so 2 years ago, I went through David Kessler's training, and grief.com is a wonderful
Yes. Resource.
place to go. And he has different groups, whether it's child loss, pet loss. He has different groups. So people that have had loss can share.
Yeah.
And be witnessed and whatnot. And here's a man who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, wrote all these books. One day he went to lunch with his 21-year-old son.
Yes. Right.
And he never saw him again. So then he became the griever. So
even though, I was going to say, and what makes his story so unique is that he had studied grief and been with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and then to have his own personal experience. I just think, oh my gosh, what a gift for us, what heartbreak for him, but what a gift for us that he's been able to continue to teach from that place of truly having experienced the deepest loss that you can, the loss of a child. And
I want to say to that too, is he was smart enough through all of his experiences is to contact someone like you or me. He contacted a grief therapist and he went into therapy. Yes. And here is somebody you think practically wrote the book on it. But so we all need that. So
oh, what's that old adage that a doctor that treats himself has a fool for a patient? So he knew that he needed help. He knew from all of his studies that when you're going through, you do need help. Yes. And I wanted to just add, because you answered my question that I wanted to come back to when you talked about having these ambivalent feelings about someone that has transition, that maybe you love them and you hate them. Let's just be real. And writing the letter. And what I've done with so many of my clients that has been helpful, I have them write that letter. And then when they're in that place and when they're in a place, that I have them then write a response from that person that they've written to. For me, in my experience, that has been so healing. Talk about being able to then to say goodbye. They felt like they've had a goodbye with that person's input as well. So, and I'm pretty sure it's grief recovery therapy that says, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while. Never ask for forgiveness. Offer an apology. And I thought that, just as you said, right, I apologize for this part or that part.
And also with those letters is, I don't encourage people to say anything they don't truly feel or mean.
Yes.
Right?
This is the time
to say, I forgive you for, and maybe I'm not in that place yet of forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly.
There is also another term that I have in my letters about, I want you to know. So I want you to know, when you took me on the boat trip, I really had a wonderful time. I really want you to know that what you did to me was so damaging. I'm still working on it. Do you know what I mean? There's certain things, not in an accusatory, but this is just a plain, this is the fact.
Yes. It's the facts. It's uncensored. It's unabashed. It's unapologetic. Get to that place, I think, is where the work really happens. And you're right. Never trying to, what do we call that? Spiritual bypass thing? Oh, I know you love me and you just did some, bad things and blah. No, being truthful about what's there. Truly truthful. I
wanted to tell you one other thing before your next question. As I went through my death midwife, or I'm a death doula, part of that is, there's a lot to it, but I just wanted to touch upon when you were talking about how when you're in grief, it's just not sorrow 24 hours a day. So when we teach people about the body of their loved one, You can do a home funeral. You have body disposition is up to the family. It doesn't necessarily have to be the funeral home or whatever. So, and every state is a little bit different. But what we're learning and what I have learned and teach is how to care for their loved one once they have transitioned.
Mm-hmm.
And while you're washing the body of your loved one, and I have experienced this more than once, is that it is such a healing time. And as a culture, we push death over there. We just let them take it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to be around it. It's done, boom. But when people can really be mindful and be present and possibly take part in washing their loved one's body, they share memories, family memories. And next thing I know, people will be crying, and then they'll be laughing, and they'll be crying again. But it is just a very healing process. So, yeah, that was what I have witnessed.
You just brought a memory back of my own mother who died 7 years ago. And anyway, I got to go and be there to prepare her body. And I got to bathe her. And it was just the most loving and nurturing and tender moment for me. I got to wash her hands and imagine the arms holding me as a little girl, and, washing her belly, and imagine her carrying me in her belly. And it was just, you talk about allowing some grief to really move through and surface that. I wouldn't trade that for any experience in the world with my mom. So,
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, so thank you. Wow. Oh, well, Shari, believe it or not, you're going to have to just come back because we are almost at time here. And I wanted to leave a few minutes for you to talk about your services, your coaching services, and what you offer, and if you have any workshops or classes coming up. But first, I want to just thank you for your deep, deep, heartfelt sharing and insight and being so intimate with us today. Because I feel that when you and I can be this intimate with sharing something so personal and so that can be so deeply painful, that we're showing others the way, that we are then in turn saying to others that it's okay to grieve. So if we grieve, we allow others to. So I want to say thank you for that aspect. And namaste. So let us know where we can find Madam Shari and what Madam Shari is doing in her world.
Well, thank you for putting that up. My website is called onepowermoment. And I wanted you to understand, and this is how I get people to kind of remember this, is that the past is over. Sometimes we have to deal with it and look at it, re-examine it, heal from it. But the past is there. The future isn't there yet. And what we have is this one moment. And in this one moment, this is where the power is.
Oh, wow.
Whoever had power over you in the past, I do a lot of call backing my power because so many of us have given our power away. So it's one power moment. And I have used that for probably 25 years because it was just so true for me. And it helps me come back into the now. We love that. Be here now. I do coaching one-on-one on Zoom. I'm located right now in Tucson, Arizona. Just came back to the US from Mexico, and I do travel quite a bit, but I love Zoom. And I am starting a tapping for a healthy way because I also deal with the emotional freedom techniques and the emotions around food and eating. So I have that coming up actually this Thursday, starting a 90-day event that people are pretty excited about. I do
Great.
Grief Unraveled workshops, and they'll be listed on my website. I also do EFT training and tapping so that people can, it really helps with anxiety and some other things. And so I'm just, I do feelings, dealings with feelings. So many people that I work with don't know how to get angry. Well, that's another one of those emotions that are just stuck in
Well,
there. Let's get it
well,
out,
that's
in a
that's
healthy
another
way.
show. That's another show,
Yes, yes.
another program.
So
Yes,
anyway,
yes.
thank you so much, Bonnie, and thank you for what you do. I love the fact that we met at a death cafe.
I
And
was just
uh,
going to say that. Yes, that we were facilitating in Ajijic. There's an Ajijic chapter of Death Cafe, and the tagline is "Talking about death won't kill you." And it's a great way to come and lighten up around death. I don't think I've laughed and giggled so much in a group talking about death. And it's a great experience. I know there's some death cafes online, so if you're interested, just Google death cafe, and they would definitely come up. There was one more. You know what, Sherry? I think the best thing to do at this point is to just make a date and have you come back. And if
I-
you would come back, that would be great. Just so many. It's just such a rich topic, and it's something that affects every last one of us on the planet. Is
Bonnie,
love and grief.
thank
Yes.
you for the work that you do in this world.
Oh,
I've just been privileged to be in your presence, and now just seeing you again. You're truly an earth angel.
well, you know what I'm doing, Sherry? I'm holding the mirror for you to see the work that you're doing. So,
Thank you.
I so appreciate it. And just thanking my beautiful guest, Sherry. And we really, Joe, would you just put our contact information up again? Just so that if you didn't get it, and I was going to say, I love your website, One Power Moment, because I always say that life is lived in moments, not big chunks of time.
Mhm.
And the power, I always say the power of the juice is in this moment. So
Mhm.
thank you for affirming that.
Mhm.
And with that, I'm just going to invite people to make a donation to New Thought Media Network, and it's New Thought in newthoughtmedianetwork.org/donate. Thank you, Joe. I was going to try to do the call letters and I couldn't remember them. So, and make a donation so that we can continue to have quality programs on this platform. There are some great programs that are here. That one that comes to mind is tomorrow there's poetry, prayer, and another P. But join her. It's Tracy Brown, and also I have a dear friend on Thursdays who has a program that comes on at 11. Thank you, poetry and practice. There you go. Thank you, Joe. And then my dear friend Zoe, who is on Thursdays, and he has a program called Choice, Your Superpower. So, and I know you don't have a promo for this, but it's Joy in the Journey, and it's on Thursdays at the same time that I'm here, and I'm here at 2 Central Time. She is Joy in the Journey at 2 Central Time on Thursday, and I just appreciate everyone that's tuned in. And what I'd like to leave you with is this: is that I want you to just go to your mirror right now, just right now. And I want you to just look yourself in the eye. And I want you to ask yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need? Whatever comes up, honor that, because you're so worthy of having your needs met. So let it start with you. So thank you so much. Again, I'm Bonnie Gonzalez. I am a grief coach as well, and you can find me at Bonnie Gonzalez 14 Gmail or Bonnie, yourdoulaforgrief.com. So thank you so much, and can't wait to see you next week, next time. Alrighty. Ciao. My tagline, Shari, is don't do grief alone. Don't do grief alone. So, ciao.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Ciao. So, namaste.
New Thought Radio, music from all your favorite New Thought artists. From Jamie Lula, Karen Drucker, Gary Lynn Floyd, Ricky Byers, Daniel Namath, Eddie Watkins Jr., and many, many more. 24/7 New Thought Radio. Positively inspiring.